Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I hope you had a good week since last time we met. A week of bracha and hatzlacha. And tonight we're going to be taking a look at the next parsha in Sefer Bereshit, which is Parashat Vayetzei, which literally means "and he left, he departed." So this story, this parsha, in some ways, is a transition parsha. Last week, as you know, Parsha told the story of Yitzchak of individuals still. We saw Rivka, we saw Esav, we saw Yaakov. This parsha really begins to describe a family, at least the formation of a family, the formation of Yaakov's family, which becomes the preeminent family from which all of the Jewish people spring forth. So let's just do a quick overview of what you're going to see in Parshat Vayetzei. Of course, we're not going to be touching upon all of this, just selected items. And just as a reminder, one of the things that I think motivates me to learn with you is the hope that the things that we discuss tonight will somehow make their way to your Shabbos table, your table, your friend's table. I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves. I don't want there to be any sort of distracting background noise. So if you're not muted, I'm going to just ask you to do that, please. So that way, everybody can hear. There's no distracting noise. Thank you. So I hope that some of the things that we discussed, you're going to have a chance to bring to your Shabbos table, your friend's Shabbos table, and that way enhance the holiness of Shabbat and your own enjoyment of it by engaging in hopefully meaningful conversation. So here's the overview of Parshat Vayetzei. At last week's Parsha, the very, very end, after the deceit that Yaakov perpetrated along with his mother's help, Rivka realizes that her son Esav is plotting to murder Yitzchak out of hate, rage for him, as it were, stealing his blessings. And so Rivka tells Yitzchak that they got to get a wife for Yaakov, and the um, the, the idea, which is really in some ways it's not really a lie, but it's a method by which to get him out of the house and save his life, is to go back to her homeland, her town, and find a wife. And so, beginning of Parshat Vayetzei, Yaakov's journey to find a wife begins. He leaves home, and on the way, he encounters the nighttime. He lies down. He has the famous dream. We'll talk a little bit about that, where he sees a ladder with the base in the earth, and the top of it is reaching the heavens, and angels are going up and they're going down on it. He wakes up, he realizes he is in a holy place. He realizes that he's just had a vision. He makes a promise to God and asks God for help, and he continues on his way. He reaches the town and he comes to the well, and that's a well where all the shepherds used to bring their flocks. And there he encounters a beautiful girl whose name is Rachel. And as the Torah tells us, he falls in love with Rachel, meets her father Lavan, and wants to marry Rachel. 7 years, he has to work for 7 years. That's the deal before Lavan will agree to let his youngest daughter marry Yaakov. He works for 7 years. The Torah tells us it just passes like a minute because he's so in love with this woman and he can't wait to build his life with her. But the night of the wedding, Leah and Rachel conspire, um, and realizing that this would be an immense embarrassment for Leah because her father Laban refused to let Yaakov marry the younger daughter before the elder daughter. So apparently, according to the oral Torah, according to Chachamim, Rachel gave Leah those special, intimate, private signs that they had established between them in anticipation that Laban would in fact try to do something that he did, and so that she would be able to give him the signs to indicate that everything is okay. But Rachel gave Leah those signs, and Leah successfully was able to fool Yaakov. Here's a question for which I don't have an answer tonight. We know that Yaakov subsequently was so upset, and the Torah then details the birth of Yaakov's family and so many children through Leah, but Leah never became his beloved wife. In fact, the Torah uses a description, not only was she not his beloved wife, that the relationship between Yaakov and Leah was really strange. She was the snuah, the one who was not loved. In fact, technically, the word snuah literally means hated. I don't know if it means he hated her, but clearly he didn't love her. Why was Yaakov not angry with Rachel? He must have figured out that Rachel had given Leah the signs. So he was upset that he woke up in the morning beside the bed. Leah was with him in bed. But why was he not angry at Rachel for doing this? That's a different question. Anyways, the Torah then begins to describe the birth of some of children to Leah. And as we read each and every one of the names that Leah gives to this child, just reveals how much she looks to find the love of her husband. And each child bears a name that somehow talks about the strained relationship. It's actually hard to read. It's if you let yourself just think about it, it's very emotional, and it's a very upsetting part of the Torah, because it just we watch and we see and we accompany Leah on this very, very difficult journey. And the birth of the children continues. Rachel, of course, doesn't have children, and she wants children. After the 7 years that I mentioned, he does marry Rachel. Leah is the mother who produces the children. Rachel does not produce the children. Yaakov then ultimately is not only married to Leah and then to Rachel, but there are two other women concubines, that Bilhah and Zilpah, and they give birth to children. And so ultimately, from this union, as you know, 12 children are born. Yaakov continues to work for his father-in-law, who is an untrustworthy person, and he becomes enormously wealthy. He's a shepherd. And at some point, when he was thinking about leaving, because the relationship between Yaakov and Lavan was really, really strained. Lavan was not trustworthy. Lavan was as Yaakov describes at the very end of the Parsha, how many times Lavan actually cheated him and mistreated him. But Yaakov is a smart man, and at a point in which he could have left, he decides to stay, and he makes a deal with Lavan that he's not going to take. He wants a certain type of animal. These are the spotted animals, and in a map, in a section of the Torah, I'm not going to be able to explain. He figures out some sort of strategy, physiologically, biologically, zoologically, to have the animals in his charge increase dramatically. And he becomes really, really wealthy to the point that it becomes an issue of strife between the shepherds of Yaakov and the shepherds of Lavan. And Yaakov sees that the relationship with Lavan is deteriorating. Hashem appears to Yaakov and he says, it's time for you now to leave here and to go back home. So he listens to God. He calls a meeting with his two wives, and he tells them that it's time to go home because the relationship between Lavan and Yaakov is soured. And he asks his wives for their reaction. And they sadly say, he doesn't care about us. Our father doesn't care about us, so there's no reason holding us back. And so they secretly and quietly leave when Lavan is away from home doing some work with his flock. Rachel secretly tries to redeem her father by stealing some of his idols. Lavan comes home, realizes that everybody's checked out, that Yaakov is gone, his two daughters is gone, his grandchildren are gone, and he chases after Yaakov. God interferes and says to Lavan, you must not touch them, you must not harm them. Lavan finally catches up to Yaakov. They come to an agreement, they enter into an agreement, and at the end of this agreement, they depart. And as Yaakov makes his way back to the land of Israel, back to his homeland, he encounters angels, as he encountered at the beginning of the Parsha. And so ends Parsha Vayetzei. It's so jam-packed. I find it an emotional Parsha, especially trying to understand how the relationship between Yaakov, Leah, and Rachel developed. So let's start with the beginning, with the very first pasuk, actually. And here's the pasuk. I'm reading from Chumash. You don't have to. Chapter 28, Kafchet. Let's do the first pasuk, which is pasuk Yud, verse 10. Vayetzei Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva, vayelech Haran. English, Jacob departed from Be'er Sheva and went toward Haran. Jacob departed and went toward Haran. Again, traditional rabbinic understanding of the way in which the Torah was written is that there is no repetition. There's nothing unnecessary, be it a letter, a word, a verse, or even a phrase. And so, therefore, if you're going to tell us, if the Torah wishes to tell us that Yaakov went to Haran, then only those words are necessary. Yaakov went to Haran. I know where he's from because the whole last Parsha is telling us about that story. Where he's from is almost self-evident. And yet the Torah doesn't say he went to Haran. It says he left. He departed from Beersheba and went to Haran. So that first part about him leaving seems unnecessary. Whenever you go anywhere, you obviously depart from the place that you're leaving. So to state something which is obvious is unnecessary. And so that question is a question that is dealt with extensively. And Rashi deals with it also and quotes one of the explanations from our rabbis. So I'm going to read the Rashi and explain it because there's a nuance here that I just want to unpack a little bit with you, and I want to just explore a side of this commentary with you. So here's the Rashi. I'll read it in Hebrew and then I'll translate. Lo hayat tzarich lichtov ela vayelech Yaakov Harana. The verse really only had to say that he went to Haran. It did not have to say he departed from Beersheba, as we said. Velama hiskiri yetziato. So why did the Torah explicitly mention his departure if all it needed to say was he went to Haran? Ela magid. Rather, the Torah wishes to inform us sheyetziat tzadik min hamakom osa roshem, that the departure of a righteous person from a place leaves or makes an impression. Shebizman tzadik ba'ir, for as long as the righteous person is found within the city, hu hoda, he is the majesty, hu ziva, he is the glory, hi hadra, he is the beauty. So as long as the righteous person is in the town, he constitutes the beauty, the grandeur, the majesty of that city. Yatsa misham, but once or if the righteous person leaves that city, departs from it, Panahoda, Panaziva, Panahadra. Then its majesty, its beauty, its glory departs along with the tzaddik, along with the righteous person. In other words, we know where he's going. That's a piece of information to tell us about the sort of the GPS, where he's going, and maybe the route he's taking. What the beginning of the verse is telling us, according to Rashi, is that it wants to say something about the actual departure, that Yaakov's departure left an impression on the people in the town. Yaakov's departure left an impression on the people on the town. So here's a question. Well, Yaakov is the third of our fathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the Torah is filled with all sorts of descriptions of journeys, starting with Abraham. Abraham also traveled a lot in his lifetime, as is in fact described in the Torah. So if that's the case, then when Abraham left Haran on his journey, on his trajectory to get to the land of Israel, why didn't the Torah say something similar as it did to Yaakov right now? That when Avram left Haran, that his departure left an impression on the city of Haran. Its majesty, its glory, its beauty was diminished. It doesn't say that. It only says it by Yaakov. So I want to share one possible answer, and there's many, many answers, and I'm not offering you any one answer and saying this is it. And even actually in any of the commentary I'm sharing tonight or any other of the evenings, I'm not saying this is the only explanation. It's one I think that's worth contemplating. You might not like it, but it's still worth thinking about, even if at the end we say, no, it doesn't sit well with us. So here's one possibility. So one of the differences between the type of people that the Torah describes is Abraham's personality and Yaakov's personality may be the key to understanding why the Torah never said that about Abraham, but did say it, or wanted us to understand that point of departure when it came to Yaakov. See, Abraham was an out there sort of guy. That was who he was. He was an outreach worker. He was the first outreach worker. And he made a point of reaching out. He made a point of fulfilling the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim, as is exemplified at the beginning of Parsha Vayetzei, when the three angels, he's hurting from Brit Milah. Nonetheless, Abraham wants to bring people in. He wants to do kiruv. He wants people to be in his home, so he has the opportunity to talk with them, to discuss with them about God, his existence, his presence, and his influence over the whole world. But Yaakov, his grandson, was a different sort of person. And we know from the very beginning of the stories of the birth of the two twins, Esav and Yaakov, Well, Esav is Ish Sadeh. He's the hunter. He's the guy who's out there, not necessarily doing kiruv, but he certainly isn't a homebody. Whereas the Torah definitely tells us that when it comes to Yaakov, and here are the words that the Torah describe, Ish Tam Yoshev Holim. He was somehow a person who was homebound. Why? Because he was studying. He was studying by himself. He was studying with his father for a period of time, according to the Chachamim. He and his grandfather, that means Abraham, would study on a regular basis. So Yaakov is a a studious guy. He's home. He's in yeshiva. He's in the Beit Midrash. He's studying. He's learning. He's reading. He's contemplating. So therefore, one might have thought that when Abraham left somewhere, that makes a huge impression. Interesting. But when Yaakov, who is a very, would seem to be an insular sort of person, very into himself, isolated, not out there the way his grandfather was, you might think that his departure matters very little. So, therefore, in order to correct that mistake, the Torah says, no, don't think that. When Yaakov left town, it made an impact. People knew that Yaakov wasn't there anymore. So the Torah came to explicitly emphasize that somebody like Yaakov, who might be studying Torah, might be studying Torah intensely and in a manner that reduces or diminishes his public appearance, still has influence on the community in which he lives. And then famously, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement, says something really interesting. I just want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's an interesting idea. So I'll read it in Hebrew and I'll explain it. שבשעה שמתחזק יהודי בלימוד התורה בקובנה, at the time that a Jew, a person, intensifies his study, focuses attention on the study of Torah, and if this person lives in the Lithuanian city of Kovna, Yehudi b'Tzarfat ino mitbolel. A Jew in France will not assimilate. Let's say that again.
Hello.
So I see some of you are still not muted, so I'm just going to ask, please, everybody, take a moment to mute yourselves. So what is being said is that there's an impact that a person studying Torah in Lithuania has on a Jew living in France. Let's just think about this for a second. Let me just change the model for a second. We've seen this happen several times. If there were to be an earthquake in one part of the world, it would not be uncommon, depending on, I guess, the earthquake, its intensity, to issue a tsunami warning in another part of the world because the force of the earthquake could, in fact, have influence in another part of the world. The force could cause all sorts of waves. I don't know the geological terms of it, but we've seen it, we've read about it, we've watched it, and in fact, maybe some of us have even experienced it. So within the physical world, the idea that an event happening in point A can have an impact on a community not even nearby in point B, that somehow makes sense in the physical world. So now let's think about it within the spiritual world and see how that plays out for us. So God forbid somebody's at Mount Sinai Hospital and in serious condition, and you're at home, and you open up your Tehillim and you're davening for them. Do you believe that your tefillot could have an impact on that person in Mount Sinai? Well, Mount Sinai is downtown. I'm university. I'm living in the Bathurst Lawrence area. Do you think that has an impact? Do you believe in the power of prayer? So I'm assuming that many of us would say, yes, I do. I think that prayer matters. Okay, so I'm okay praying for somebody that's not near me. Not only that, not near me, I could even pray for somebody in a different city. I believe that the prayers that we pray in Toronto had an impact on what went on in Israel post October 7th. Do you believe that? I believe that. And I'm assuming that maybe many of you, if not all of you, believe that. So in the realm of the spiritual world, the metaphysical, we accept the notion that spiritual energy that is created in point A somehow can have an impact on others in point B, and that point B may be very far away. So now let's just take it one more step to the Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Well, what we're trying to do, this equation, this linkage, how does it work for Rabbi Salanter? So now I'm engaged in a spiritual endeavor, but I'm not calling it prayer. I'm calling it Torah study. That too is a spiritual endeavor. So I'm creating some sort of spiritual energy through the Torah that I'm studying here in Toronto. But Rabbi Yisrael Salanter thought that just like my prayer connects me to another Jew, whom I may not even know. So when you and I were praying for Jews during the war in Israel, or during the bombing in Iran, maybe you knew people specifically and you're praying for them, but likely Jews all over the world were just praying for other Jews that we didn't know, for the Jewish people. And we believe that it helped. Well, if prayer, which is a spiritual endeavor, can help, can Torah study? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, absolutely. So Torah study happening in Toronto, for example, right now, all of us, we're online studying Torah for an hour. That whatever it is that we're creating here, besides just the interested intellectual ideas that we're sharing, but this spiritual energy that we're creating, I'm creating, you're creating, this intention that we're building, that we're stirring, somehow has the ability to reach beyond where we are. And somewhere in the world, and I don't know where, I don't know, this energy is having a positive impact on other Jews. That's a powerful statement. And I don't know whether we think about that the same way. That I'm coming to a shiur and I'm coming to a shiur. That's it. So the shiur is 60 minutes long. We're going to have some interesting discussions. Maybe Rabbi Daim will say something interesting, and then the shiur is over. Rabbi Salanter is saying he wants us to consider it in a completely different way. That what we're doing tonight is essential. It's not just a pastime, and it's not just an interesting way to spend 60 minutes, but that when we intentionally engage in aspects of spiritual mitzvot, we have an impact on our brothers and sisters elsewhere in the world. So not only does it fascinating idea, it does create a sense of responsibility. So if I were to tell you that it's helpful to daven for those who are ill, to daven for the safety of our soldiers, to daven for the welfare of people, Jews somewhere who are vulnerable, what if I were to tell you that the study of Torah is exactly the same? Would we want to engage in the study of Torah the same way that we'd be willing to open up a chapter of Tehillim, or we would be willing to recite Achenu, sing Achenu, Kol Beit Yisrael, close our eyes, grab a shoulder, and somehow sway to the song? I'm not sure. But I think Rabbi Salanter is challenging us to understand that, yeah, we leave impressions. In the spiritual world, we leave impressions. Just like Yaakov left an impression. He walked out of the city. But truth be told, unlike his grandfather, he may not have gone out to coffee houses and started schmoozing with people over at Tim Hortons. He may have been in his home studying Torah. And yet, says Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the Torah wants us to understand that he had that impact. And as he had that impact, so might we. So I just want to raise that as something to keep in mind and frame a little bit about our Torah study, just how powerful it is, not only is transformative for us, but as a way to understand its role in preserving the Jewish people. And I think, and I'm afraid, I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying this really in any political way, but this may be one of the ideas that animates part of the Orthodox Haredi world. That study of Torah does make a difference. And again, please don't say, are you saying Haredim shouldn't serve in the army? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not. But it is a principle that we believe that the study of Torah is a spiritual force that not only affects the person engaged in it, but it affects the welfare of the Jewish people in its entirety. Okay, let's go on and take a look and just consider a little bit about this vision, this dream that Yaakov Avinu has. So he flees, and it's nighttime, and he makes camp, and he tries to protect himself. He gathers stones, puts it beneath his head as a pillow, as a protection, and he falls asleep. And while he's sleeping, I'll read it in Hebrew and English. Vayachalom v'hinei sulam mutzav arza, v'rosho magia hashamayma, v'hinei malachei Elohim olim v'yordim bo. And he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set earthward, and its top reached heavenward. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending. And behold, Hashem was standing over him. V'hinei Elohim nitzav alav vayomar. And he said, I am Hashem, God of Abraham, your father, and God of Yitzchak. The ground upon which you are lying, to you will I give it, and to your descendants. Your offspring shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall spread out powerfully westward, eastward, northward, and southward. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and by your offspring. Behold, I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go, and I will return you to this soil, for I will not forsake you until I will have done what I have spoken about you. So he has this extraordinary dream, and dreams, by the way, occupy a lot of real estate in the Torah and Sefer Breshit. There are a lot of people with dreams. Avimelech has a dream. Paro has a dream, and Yaakov has a dream. Avimelech has a dream. Like there's a lot of dreams happening, and obviously this dream becomes critically important. But what is this dream about? And what message is this dream? And again, this is one of the principles of studying Torah. When we're reading this Parsha, we're reading the story about about Yaakov Avinu. But it's not only about Yaakov Avinu. We're reading a story about us. We're reading something that the Torah wants you and me in Toronto on this evening in 2025 to think about. That there's something about the dream that Yaakov experienced way back that we should experience, that we need to internalize and we need to encounter as Yaakov did that night. So what is it? So this idea of a ladder that somehow has its bottom on earth and its top in the heavens. So the ladder becomes a vehicle of connection, doesn't it? And not only is it a vehicle of connection, we see angels, as it were, going up, and going down. And there's a fascinating there's a fascinating Gemara, and I just want to read what the Gemara says about this. It's a machloket. It's a disagreement between two great Chachamim, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yanai. Listen to this. So of those two, one of them said, Olim v'yordim b'sulam. So one said, Olim v'yordim b'sulam. That, yeah, there were angels going up and going down. Where? On the ladder. Isn't that obvious? That's what it says. Malache, and it says pretty much, I'll read it again. V'hinei malache Elokim olim v'yordim bo. But one of the other rabbis said, that's not the only way of it translating those words. What do you mean? So the last words, olim v'yordim bo. The word bo can mean two things. It can mean the angels are going up and going down, bo, on it, which would be the ladder. Or, as the other opinion says, the word bo can equally correctly be translated as not on it, but on him. That the angels are going up and are going down on him. And that's why one says, no, I don't agree with you. The word bo is describing not the state of the ladder, but it's describing the state of Yaakov. And if you take a step back and listen to this machloket, this really machloket in some ways really encapsulates a fundamental concept of Judaism. It's not just a dream that Yaakov had centuries ago. It's really a metaphor for the essential belief of Judaism. Judaism says man is the ladder. Man is the ladder. We connect. We connect the heaven and the earth. We were created from the earth. That's clear from the beginning of the beginning of part of Sefer Bereshit. God collected the earth, shaped man, blew his neshama into him, as it were. Vayitach b'apav, Hashem blew neshama into man's nostrils and into his body. But essentially, we are earth. That's why when we die, chas v'shalom, we have a funeral. The body is returned to the place from which it came. So our heads are b'shamayim, meaning what? Means God blew neshama into our faces, into our noses, as it were, but we're also deeply connected to the earth because that's where we're from. We're like the sulam, with the two parts of our lives connecting. And this is really a different perspective from two other great world religions, Christianity and Islam. You see, Islam, based on the writings, and I'm no expert, and maybe some of you here are experts, when in Islamic theology, when we talk about the world to come is often described in terms that you and I would say are more connected to this world. What would the life of a person be who was righteous in this world be in heaven? It would be a life filled with pleasures that we would associate more with this life. So it's an attempt, as it were, to bring the earth into heaven, whereas in a part of Christian theology, we try to bring heaven down to earth. For some holy people, especially priests, they live a heavenly existence. They live a celibate existence. They live an existence which really tries to create a spiritual life amongst the forces that are very physical. But Judaism doesn't seek to do either of those two things alone. It seeks to create a different perspective. The Kotzker Rebbe was known to say a famous word about angels. Who says, God says, I don't need more angels in heaven. I have lots. What I need is mention. I need people. I need people who are themselves holy. I don't need more angels who are holy. I need more people who are holy. And what does it mean to be holy? In our perspective, it's the ladder. The ladder is the vehicle that brings us the holiness because it binds us, connects us to the two poles of our lives, that which is physical, that which is spiritual. And we're not trying to have one over the other. We need both. And so therefore, this idea of Yaakov Avinu having this experience, he's coming to understand something that he may never have understood. And here's this, I want to transition into this second idea about this dream that he has. And this idea was offered by Rabbi Ben Zion Fear in his book Hegiyonah Shel Torah, where he says an interesting question. He says, what's with the angels on the ladder? Now, we have prophetic writings like Navi Yechezkel, who describes angels. And I guess that within the entertainment industry and within art culture, if you happen to try to draw or to sculpt an angel, what would be one of the most prominent features of an angel? The wings. We didn't make that up. Yechezkel and Navi, one of the great Nevi'im who beheld a prophetic vision, saw angels, and angels, yes, do have knafayim. They have wings. Okay, so what do wings do? Wings help you fly, as it were. So then why are angels on ladders? Why do angels have to go up and down a ladder? They don't need a ladder. The ladder is superfluous. What's the image of a ladder have to do with angels? If you want to have angels, so let them be flying up and down. I get it. So that's the message. Angels flying up, angels flying down. But the ladder is an interesting vehicle. Rabbi Ben Zion Fear says something fascinating. And just remember a minute ago when we talked about the differences between Yaakov Avinu and Avram Avinu, remember we talked about Avram was a more out there sort of guy. He was the first kiruv worker, the guy who was machmis orchim, the man who was out there. And Yaakov was the Yoshev Ohalim, Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. He wasn't out there. He was very, very into his head, and he was very, very into the study of Torah, as maybe he needed to be at that point. But right here, in this part of his journey, something happens. Something switches, and it switches in him in a drastic way. The man who was the man of Torah has now a vision that he never had before. He had angels coming down to earth. But why would angels come down to earth? And I know there are multiple answers. This Rashi gives one answer, set of answers, that angels from Israel can't accompany outside of Israel, and angels outside of Israel can't go into Israel. And so the angels which are accompanying Yaakov, who are in Israel, now have to leave because he's just on the verge of crossing the border out of Israel. So that's why we have angels going up, the angels which are accompanying him from Israel going up, angels coming down. These are the angels who are now going to accompany him out of the land of Israel as he goes to Badam. But that's not the only opinion that's stated. Second opinion that I want to share, which is what Rabbi Benzion Shiur suggests, that angels are coming down because angels realize something happens on earth that never happens in heaven. What happens? You see, when a person dies, the heavenly existence that we understand, certainly Rambam talks about this, it's a static existence. There are no changes happening to angels. They don't have the ability to grow. They don't have the ability to do what we have in our lives. So while our lives may be bound by the limits of physicality, this is the only life that allows for change and growth and development and the idea of engaging in things that we didn't know. Angels are static. Angels are in a box. Angels have a responsibility, but that's it. They can't multitask. They don't do more than one thing. We saw that in Parsha Vayetzei, when three angels came to remember Avram is not feeling well. The angels come, they help them make him feel better, tell him about the birth of a child, and then go, excuse me, onward to destroy Sodom. So why do you need three angels? Just send one angel. Apparently, God gives the angels ability because the angels only have the ability to do one tafkid, one role, one task. That's how limited they are. And so angels, in some ways, come down to the earth. Why? To see and to appreciate what we can do here. And what can we do here? We can work. We can accomplish. We can do things that angels can't. And Yaakov Avinu, for the first time in his life, he sees this. Because up until now, he doesn't have that ability. He's just into the books. He's into the Sefer. In fact, his mother was very, very dominant in that whole Parsha last week, right? His mother tells him what to do. Do it. Go here, do that. Go say this, put this on, stand there. And he does what his mother tells him. He's really, as it were, following his mother's instructions because he has not yet stepped into his role as a leader. But in this week's Parsha, at this point in time, things change for him. And he understands something that he never understood before. He understands that the idea of being bound to earth and still having your head in Shemayim allows you to do something. And fascinating. I just want to jump with you just so you understand this part. Remember I talked about his encounter at the well where he meets Rachel for the first time? So I just want to read that story to you, and I want you to listen to the story, and I want you to think about the story and Yaakov's role in the story. Here's the story. I'm reading now from chapter 29. I'm going to read it in the English just to save time. Excuse me. So Jacob lifted his feet and went toward the land of the Easterners. He looked, and behold, a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lay there beside it, for from that well they would water the flocks. And the stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks would be assembled there, they would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep. Then they would put back the stone over the mouth of the well in its place. So I think everyone gets that. There's a well, all the flocks, big, heavy rock covers the well to prevent anything inappropriate falling in the water. And they would wait for all the shepherds to come because the rock apparently is very heavy, push the rock off, water their sheep, and cover it again. Jacob said to them, so he comes to this well and he sees all these flocks of sheep just lounging around with the shepherds lounging around. And Jacob says to them, the shepherds, my brothers, Where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Lavan, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know. And then he said to them, is it well with him? They answered, yeah, it's well. And see, his daughter Rachel is coming with the flock. And he said, now listen to this part. Look, the day is still long. Is it not yet time to bring the livestock in, water the flock, and go on grazing? But they said, we'll be unable to until all the flocks will have been gathered and they will roll the stone off the mouth of the well, and we will then water the flock. I hope you picked this up. All of a sudden, Yaakov's interested in what? What's he talking to them about? He's talking to them about their job. He's talking to them about their work. He's talking to them about, I don't understand why you guys are not working. You know, you guys are shepherds, so water your flock. Let's roll the stone off, water your flock, and then do what? Go back and graze. That's what you're getting paid for. That's what you're doing. Yaakov Avinu is now giving Musar to a group of guys about how to do their job well. Yaakov is an Ish Tam Yoshev Olim. When did this become something on his mind? And the answer is this dream. This dream changed everything. And when we see Yaakov from the rest of this Parsha, he's not an intellectual. He's not a scholar in the tent. This man is a very active shepherd, actively building his flock, actively creating wealth, actively working, actively keeping track of his salary. Here's a man who is beginning to build his family, but not as a yeshiva man in yeshiva. He's out there in the field. So this dream at the beginning of this is really a description of how Judaism understands our role in this world. We have a role. Our job is, as God said to Adam and Chava in the very, very, very beginning, when he put them into Gan Eden, what did he say to them? You have a job. Your job is l'ovda u'l'shamra. Your job is to work the land. Your job is to do it and to preserve Gan Eden. But the first part is key, l'ovda. And so Yaakov, I think, now goes back to what that responsibility is, and he begins now to see himself in a completely different light, as evidenced by the story over there. Just moving on a little bit ahead, but now sharing with you an idea that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said in yet another one of his excellent books. I mentioned two of the books in the series. The third book that I want to share with you, or an excerpt or an idea that he mentions, is the book called Lessons in Leadership. And on this week's Parsha, Rabbi Sachs points out something really interesting about the nature of leadership, because in effect, that, of course, is a major theme which he highlights throughout the course of the book. But he begins by asking us to consider the following. I know that in our daily davening and in Shemona Esrei and other places, we talk about Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, and Elokei Yaakov. We spoke about that. But of the three, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it's clear from rabbinic literature all over the place that Yaakov is considered somehow to be the Bechir Ha'avot. He is the preferred. There's something about Yaakov which is different. It's better. It's elevated. It's superior to his father and to his grandfather. Certainly 2 points. Point one, the entire Jewish people come from Yaakov. They don't come from Avram. They don't come from Yitzchak. I mean, ultimately, you can say, yes, it all began with Avram and then it channeled through Yitzchak. But the Jewish people, the Shvatim, the 12 sons, which became the 12 tribes, that's clearly Yaakov's story. It's not Yitzchak's story, and it's not Avram's story. That's point one. Point two, which rendered Yaakov to be somehow on a higher level, a higher status than his father and grandfather, is that unlike his grandfather and unlike his father, there were no sons that he gave birth to that somehow became off the derech. They were not the pride and joy of their father and grandfather. Abraham had Yishmael, who for much of his life is described as having committed serious sins. Yes, towards the end of his life, according to Chachamim, he was Choser B'tshuva, he repented and came to at the end to bury his father. And Esav, of course, continues to be Arayom Azet, to this day, to be considered in some ways the representative of Edom, which ultimately became representative of Christianity, which was understood to be in some ways a adversary of the Jewish people. But that means that Yaakov never had a son who became such an enemy or an adversary to the Jewish people. In the words of our Chachamim, his mitah shlema, his bed is perfect, his bed is untainted, meaning that those children which came from him, his progeny, continued in his path, unlike that of his father and mother, their father and grandfather. So let's go back to that story and understand why that is. Why does it come through Yaakov? We understand he's preferred. And according to Rabbi Sachs, to understand the answer to that question, we have to take a look at Parsha Vayetzei. And I just want to read part of it. I love his writing, but his ideas in my mind are just staggeringly beautiful. Jacob was the man whose greatest visions came to him when he was alone at night, far from home, fleeing from one danger to the next. In Parshat Vayetzei, escaping from Esav, he stops and rests for the night with only stones to lie on and has an epiphany. I'm just going to skip a little bit. These are the decisive spiritual encounters of Jacob's life, yet they happen in liminal space, the space between neither a starting point nor a destination, at a time when Jacob is at risk in both directions, where he comes from and where he is going to. Yet it is at these points of maximal vulnerability that he encounters God and finds the courage to continue despite all the hazards of the journey. That's the strength Jacob bequeathed to the Jewish people. What is remarkable is not merely that this one tiny people survived tragedies that would have spelled the end of any other people, the destruction of 2 temples, the Babylonian Roman conquests, the expulsions, persecutions, and pogroms of the Middle Ages, the rise of anti-Semitism in 19th century Europe, and the Holocaust. What is remarkable is that after each cataclysm, Judaism renewed itself, scaling new heights of achievement. How fascinating is that? And just a personal anecdote, which I think really beautifully captures this idea. When I became chief rabbi, I had to undergo a medical examination. The doctor put me on a treadmill, walking at a very brisk pace. What are you testing? I asked him. How fast I can go or how long? Neither, he replied. What I'm testing is how long it takes when you come off the treadmill for your pulse to return to normal. That is when I discovered that health is measured by the power of recovery. That is true for everyone, but doubly so for leaders and for the Jewish people, a nation of leaders. That, I believe, is what the phrase "a kingdom of priests" means. Leadership, especially in matters of the spirit, is deeply stressful. Okay, I'm not going to read any more, but the point that I think Rabbi Sachs is making is that Yaakov's experience, in some ways, is his own personal experience. There's no question about it. But it's not just his personal experience. It's the experience of so many of us who have stresses in our lives, who have tragedies in our lives, who have challenges in our lives, who have moments where we feel that our faith may be challenged. We have moments where we feel we're alone, we're in a dark place. And that certainly is true not only of individuals or of families, but it's true of the family of the Jewish people, as Rabbi Sachs himself said so eloquently in the section. But what characterizes us as a people is exactly what we see in the Parsha, that through all of this, Yaakov seems to find the strength to go on. And even though these challenges could have quashed someone else's spirit, they didn't quash his. And it was not easy. It was not simple. And he had to go through so much. And there were moments of darkness and moments that you could say maybe he himself was not happy with, not proud of. In fact, towards the end of his life, not in this parsha, but after he goes down to Egypt to reunite with his son Yosef, and he meets for the first time Paro, who of course had elevated Yosef, who saved everybody, and Paro looks at him, looks at Yaakov, and he's shocked by his appearance. You may remember this. And Torah tells us that Paro turns to Yaakov and says, "How old are you?" Because he was taken aback by just how aged and how worn Yaakov's face was. And Yaakov says, "My life is hard. I've had many difficult years." of his own life, Yaakov assesses it as being a life of hardship. And yet, it is precisely through Yaakov that we, the Jewish people, get our name. We're called Bnei Yisrael, which is the other name for Yaakov. We're not Bnei, no, we are technically, biologically, Bnei Yitzchak. We are all technically also Bnei Abraham. But it's clear that the Chachamim understood that it is from Yaakov's family that we get the spiritual characteristic that we have. And this dream, in some ways, that moment, awakens him to an understanding that he never had. And hopefully it's an understanding that many of us can come to about our own lives. Okay, I just want to move on a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna skip a little bit here. They say it's, maybe one time we'll have a chance to study verse by verse and take a look at it more in depth. But for the purpose of this Parsha class, I'm picking and choosing certain things that maybe will resonate with you and you'll share. And now I'm going to jump to Perek Lamed Aleph, chapter 31, if you're using a Chumash. And I want to take a look. At Pasuk 2, bit 31:2. So let's start at the very beginning. We'll do verses 1 and 2. Vayishma et divrei bnei Lavan lemor lakach Yaakov et kol asher la'avinu u'me'asher le'avinu asa et kol hakavod hazeh. Then he, referring to Yaakov, heard the words of Lavan's sons, saying, Jacob has taken all that belonged to our father, and from that which belonged to our father, he amassed all this wealth. Now, verse 2, Jacob also noticed Lavan's disposition, that, behold, it was not toward him as in earlier days. So in English, the word is disposition. I want to read the Hebrew because I think the Hebrew word is important to know. I'll read it again in Hebrew. Vayar Yaakov et pnei Lavan. And Yaakov saw the face of Lavan. Pnei Lavan, the panim shel Lavan, the face of Lavan. The English translation or interpretation, as I often say, is disposition. But I want to point out that the words say that Yaakov saw the face of Lavan. And he saw that it was a change. It changed. And so Yaakov was listening, overheard that Lavan's sons were accusing Yaakov of, as it were, stealing Lavan's wealth. And as remembered in the overview we gave of the Parsha, he didn't steal anything. He was blessed by God, and he was able, with God's blessings, to build a huge flock, which translates into enormous wealth. But Lavan's sons got jealous and saw or felt that, well, where did he get the flock to begin with? It was Lavan's gift to Yaakov that he take these cattle and these sheep. Yaakov, with God's blessing, was able to multiply the initial number of sheep into this huge herd, which translates into huge wealth. So the words here that I just want to take a look at or just consider with you are Pnei Lavan, the face of Lavan. I just want to, for a second, think about what that means, the face of Lavan. I know what it means in the context of the story, but what does it really mean for, again, you and me? And I think what it means for you and me is the way we present ourselves to people. And it was very clear that Yaakov took a look at Lavan's face and was able to read the face. And we know that. We know that you can read a person's face. We know that our facial features and the way we present our facial features tells a story about the mood we're in, the attitudes we have, the feelings, the thoughts that are going through our minds. Our faces in some ways become, a mirror to the soul, as people say. But it also means that presents us with a responsibility. My mother had, and others like her, had often said that a person's face is public property, meaning that when you go out into the public square, you have the ability to influence people's attitudes and feelings just by exuding or broadcasting the attitudes that you have. If you walk around grumpy and mean and despondent and sad, then you're likely to influence the people in your sphere around you. The people will become themselves feeling sad, or you will break their spirit. And do you have a right to do that? Like if I were walking in the park or on a thoroughfare and I were to put something dangerous down where somebody could trip and fall and hurt themselves, I would be held responsible for putting some sort of source of danger and harm in the people's ways. That's not right. But physical harm is one thing, but there could be something called, I guess, emotional harm or distress by the way in which I carry myself. I could inject a certain mood into something which otherwise would be pleasant, happy, upbeat, cheerful, inspirational, and I can change it like that by my facial features. So from this story, we could see how Yaakov understood that Lavan was broadcasting a certain attitude. And this attitude he picked up really quickly. And because of that, he realized that he needed to change a lot of things. And ultimately, of course, with God's instruction, he was prepared to leave and to go back home. But we need to be sensitive to the fact that we have that power. And we have the power to hurt people's feelings. We have the power to change the moods. We have the power to make people feel elevated by the way we carry ourselves, or chas v'shalom, we have the power to harm them and to make them feel much, much more upset. So I want to end with a fascinating and very short idea that Rabbi Vayetzei Seforno offers toward the end of the Parsha. So at the end of chapter 31, as I mentioned before in the overview, Yaakov and his two wives and his family and all that he owns, they sort of slip away in the dead of night when Lavan is not there. They want to escape. Lavan comes home. He realizes what happened. He chases after them. God says, you better not harm them. And then they encounter each other. And in that encounter, they both agree that they need to create some sort of agreement or pact between them. And so this is what they do. I'm now reading from chapter 31, and I'll start reading from verse 46. Again, excuse me, I'm going to read it in English just to save time. And Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. So they took stones and made a mound, and they ate there on the mound. So obviously they got this little big pile of stones. It looks like a monument of some sort, which is supposed to serve as a purpose. We'll see in a second. Lavan called this big mound of stones Yigar Sahaduta, but Jacob called it Gal-Ed. So Lavan called this mound Yigar Sahaduta, which is not Hebrew. He's an Armenian. He is Aramean. So he's speaking the language, the lingua franca from where he came. So Lavan called this a mound of stones. But that's not what Yaakov called it. Yaakov karalo Gal-Ed, mound, a monument. These stones are a monument to the pact that Lavan and Yaakov made with each other. Okay, now I just want you to hear a fascinating insight that Rabbi Vayetzei Seforno says about the fact that there's two names. It's the same mound. It's not that Lavan made his own mound and that Yaakov made his own mound. There's only one mound. But Lavan wanted to call the mound Yigar Sahaduta in the Aramean language. And Yaakov said, I'm calling it Gal-Ed. So listen to the Seforno, who is explaining it. V'Yaakov karalo Gal-Ed, says the Seforno, a couple words. Shelo shina et lishono. He didn't change his tongue. He didn't change his tongue. Yaakov didn't. What does that mean? What it means is this. Seforno wants you to pay attention to the fact that Lavan was the first one who called this mound by a name, and he used the Aramean language. And Yaakov says, I'm not speaking that language. I'm using Hebrew. I'm using the words that I know from where I come from. I'm not changing. I'm not using the foreign language. I'm using our language, our people's language. And then I want you to hear the next verse. Vayomer Lavan. Lavan says, Hagal hazeh eid beini ubeinecha hayom. This mound will be, as it were, a testimony. It will be, this mound is a witness between me and you today. Al Kain Karashmo Gal'ed. Therefore, he called its name Gal'ed. What just happened here? Lavan gave it a name. The Aramean gave it a name in one language. Yaakov says, I'm not changing the language. I'm speaking my language. I'm calling it Gal'ed. And then Lavan goes back and says, okay, I agree. This will be a witness between us. And he calls it Gal'ed. And Sforno says, pay attention. Nichna lekaro bilshano shel Yaakov. That Lavan agreed, he surrendered, he relented, and he called it in the name and the language, that Yaakov used. Why is that important? I mean, after it's a mound of stones. It's with the purpose of being a marker for an agreement. But here you have Lavan, who's using language in a certain way and says, we're going to call it this. This represents where I come from. This represents my values. This represents my culture. Yaakov says, no, I'm not going to relent. I'm not going to accept your language. I'm not. I'm maintaining the Hebrew language, the Lashon HaKodesh that I know. I'm calling it Gal'ed. At the end of the story, Lavan seems to say, okay. So this story is not just a story, I don't think, about stones. And it asks, I think, a lot of questions that I don't have an answer to. But if you really want to think about what Sforno is asking us to think about, he's asking us, where's the line? Where is the line between finding your place in a culture that's different and adopting those things which are okay to adopt? And where's the line to say, I can't go any farther? This represents assimilation and I don't want it. I'm holding the line right here. And where's that line for us? Where's that line for our kids? Where's that line for our grandchildren? What are the things that we need to say, like Yaakov? No, absolutely not. It's got to be our way, because I'm not going to be open myself. I don't want to be susceptible to the forces that have possibility of harming me. What are those things that harm us? Is it the way we dress? It's the way we talk? Is it our culture? Is it our language? What is it? And I don't have a great answer. But I think that this part of the end of the story between Yaakov and Lavan is not just about a mound of stones somewhere in the ancient world that we may never encounter. And it's a great story to tell. I think it's a very contemporary story about how we continue to identify, as using some of the work that I do in my ACE job, is meeting with these extraordinary young students, campus students and young professionals who come from families which are not affiliated. They're very secular families, but it's so interesting to watch them look for those connections that they've never had, because they feel that too many lines have been blurred, and they want those lines and they want those answers and they want those connections. So you can see what happens. I can see what happens when those lines get taken away, or we never held the line. Like Yaakov said, no, we're calling it this, and this is its name, and that's what my kids need to know, and that's what my grandchildren need to know. That's what we all need to know. It's definitely a question to think about. I'm going to leave that up to you. Maybe that's something you should talk about at your Shabbos table. So thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. Please feel free to unmute yourselves, and let's just have an opportunity to share some thoughts and reactions to tonight's shiur. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It was very, very nice.
Thank you.
Like inspiring.
I appreciate you saying that. That really means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hi.
Okay, I was actually wondering where you were heading with that non-political statement about what the Haredi argument is.
Yeah.
But you covered yourself.
I really wasn't looking to bring politics into the conversation, but it lends itself to go there, but I didn't want to go there. I just
Yeah.
really wanted to bring up the idea of the possibility that what we do in our lives when we study Torah is not just about us.
Yeah, and that was the conclusion I was hoping you would reach.
Right. Good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, George. I'm glad you joined. Thank you. Okay, let's take turns here because all of this shouting at once is just getting to my mind. I can't make out what you're saying, guys. It's just too much. So,
Hi,
uh,
uh, the
hi, Marty. I'm happy to see you. I see Sharon's picture, but I'm hoping.
I don't I I just know it. Okay, on, but it was this year I've been learning for the first time. I don't know if people even realize that just before he died, Rabbi Steindl who the art of hummus. I don't think many people realize it because it was just before COVID and I didn't know it till I found it, I think, in a catalog. And it was very interesting. And, and what I found out is that he really, he really sticks a lot to, 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 to the push Parsha. He he doesn't he doesn't I think I talked to you about this last year. I I've always believed that Aesop gets a bad rap from the rabbis. That if 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 you 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 look at the language. He's very, very just the language of the text. He's he he's very he's very different from what the rabbis have done to him. In fact, there's no character I think in all of Tanakh where the difference is so great. And last week I was online with a woman by the name of Ruth Kane, who's in Baltimore, but she's a very learned woman. And, 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 and she takes it a step further. And, 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 and I was very convinced about what she said. She said that when a person sees a nevuah, any nevuah, he he's given the nevuah, and I'm being a bit oversimplistic. He's given a nevuah because he had a chance to change, and he applies that to the nevuah that Rivka gave at the beginning of Toldo. And she basically, I won't go into a thesis, but 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 with better, let's say, better parenting methods, Yaakov and Esav could have ended up as partners instead of enemies. And
Yeah.
She's a very strong woman, but very, very not in the mainstream. And every time I hear her, I find her like very challenging like that. And I think she could be right.
It's a really good point that you make about the way in which Esav is treated, certainly from rabbinic literature, 100%. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, writing in the mid-1900s, in his commentary to the Torah, says something which is so bold. It actually elicited a lot of criticism by other rabbis. The Chachamim tell us, and Rashi says this, that until they were about 13 years old, you couldn't distinguish between Esav and Yaakov, meaning, well, first of all, they were twins, but more than that, that not only were they physically alike in some ways, but their behavior was very, very similar. You couldn't say he's the good boy, he's the bad boy between Esav and Yaakov. You couldn't see that. But things changed. And Rabbi Hirsch says something, so what happened? Why did they change? And he says they changed because Rivka and Yitzchak tried to raise Esav the way they raised Yaakov. And that was a mistake because he wasn't Yaakov and he didn't have the personality and temperament of Yaakov. And they didn't sort of take that into account, and they tried to, as they say proverbially, fit a square peg in a round hole. And that didn't work. And it's almost as though Hirsch is saying, had Yitzchak and Rivka, I don't know what the word is, been more attentive, whatever the word is, then maybe things would have turned out differently. And that Esav wouldn't have become the type of person he became because they would have raised him differently. I mean, that's why that's such a bold thing to say. And you can see why there are many voices in the rabbinic community at that time and beyond who felt that this is one step too far, like just too much. But you're right. If you take a look at the overall description or way in which Esav is characterized, the literature tries to find the textual hints at that. Like one of the most obvious textual hints, and this is in the book, this is in the Torah, is the way Esav responds to the Becholah. And there you find the Torah uses the word Vayivez, that he disdained it. And what sort of a person would say that his birthright as the eldest firstborn was something so unimportant and cheap that it was not worth anything more than a bowl of lentil soup? So it says something about a person's personality. And I think that becomes the opening, Marty. I think it becomes the opening for everything else. There's an interesting phrase that the Chachamim use about Esav, but not only. And the phrase is this in Hebrew: Tolim et kilkul b'mikul kal. That we attribute any wrongdoing or any sort of deterioration to he or she who has already been deteriorated. Like just add it on. Just piling it on. The person deserves it. They've already demonstrated their core essential qualities. So we'll just attribute other sorts of failures or missteps to them as well. I don't know, but it's something that definitely is noteworthy, and I'm glad that you brought that up tonight. I really am. Thank you for doing so. And thank you everybody for joining tonight. I hope you found it helpful. And again, have conversation around your Shabbat table. Talk about some of these ideas. Even if you don't agree with them, say, I heard something, and just let's talk it out. Because that's the point of this, is to increase the study of Torah at your table, or our table, and just everywhere we go. So thank you. Have an amazing week. Maybe a week.
Thanks so much, Rabbi Diamond. Good night. Thanks much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye. 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 Bye.